One of the most difficult skills to improve on in Magic, casual or otherwise, is the vague, overarching theory of sequencing. Understanding when to play what, how to play it, and what order is crucial in turning failing board states into winning ones, and vice versa. Today I hope to demystify the idea of sequencing, and maybe supply some tips for new and experienced players to improve their sequencing. So what, at its core, does it mean to sequence well? Let's paint a hypothetical so that our ideas can be a bit more concrete. Let's say I have a lightning bolt, a monastery Swiftspear, and 2 mountains in my hand. It's turn 1, and I'm going first. What do? Well, the lightning bolt does 3 damage for 1 mana, and the Swiftspear does 1 damage for 1 mana. The first instinct is to deal as much damage as quickly as possible because it's the most mana-efficient play to make. However, because of the prowess ability of Monastery Swiftspear, you actually do more damage if you play the Swiftspear first, swing for 1, and then on your next turn cast the Lightning Bolt. That way, your Swiftspear deals an additional damage. This is a pretty simple case of sequencing, and even little things can change to make it more complicated. What if we're not going first? What if we have a Swiftspear and a Soulscar Mage in our hand? What I'm trying to say is, sequencing is not matter of fact. It's all entirely situational and simply about creating the perfect sequence of plays that puts you in the most advantageous position. Usually, this entails extracting the most value out of every card that you possibly can. If I have a creature that lets me draw a card whenever I play an instant or sorcery spell, I should play it before I play any instant and sorceries if given the opportunity. Other times, sequencing can just mean presenting a board state that allows you to deal with the most possible cards at once. If you're swinging with your big creature in your main phase before casting any spells, you're putting your opponent in the worst position to respond in a clean way. I'm sure you've heard lots of rules of thumb when it comes to sequencing. You should always go to combat before you play your spells, or wait until the last second to play your instants. While these are generally good advice, they're altered conditionally by different situations, to make it so that being fluid with your sequencing is really important. In our Monastery Swiftspear example, if the Lightning Bolt is a Lava Spike instead, you should still play it before combat to make sure you get the buff on your Swiftspear and hit for the most amount of damage. And sometimes it's good to play instants preemptively to draw out responses from your opponent. Plenty of people have been blown out by their timely removal spell being cancelled out by another pump spell stacked on top of the first one. One thing that I find incredibly helpful for analyzing sequencing is taking time to figure out what parts of your engine are currently active or can become active by actions you take. If I have an Amareth in play and a Sensei's Divining Top, and there's a Muldrifter in my hand, I should activate the Sensei's Divining Top to look at the top 3 cards of my library before I cast Muldrifter. The reason we do this is it allows me to benefit from the top of my library ability from Amareth, allowing us to maybe get a 3rd card out of Muldrifter by revealing a well-placed creature from the top of our library. Another way to analyze engines is to see how many free actions you can take, or actions that allow you to do things without mana investment or card investments. Planeswalkers are an excellent example of this, since it's usually just smart to see what Planeswalkers are beneficial to uptick or downtick before you do anything with the cards in your hand. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria upticks to draw a card, and in many games of Constructed Magic, I've started my turn by immediately using the +1 to dig for more cards. This way, I have the maximum amount of information necessary without investing unnecessary pieces into my board state. I can hit a crucial land drop, or find the timely removal spell for their most important threat, or just get an idea of what my options are for future turns to plan out where I am in this exact moment. One of the most difficult ways to analyze your board state when sequencing is analyzing it from the perspective of your opponent. Reed Duke has an excellent article on sequencing, which I'll link in the description of the video, where he talks about the idea of information as a key feature of sequencing. In his examples, he talks about attacking with a 2/2 creature into a 3/3 creature with a combat trick in your hand. Your opponent sees you making a decision that, on the surface, looks pretty bad. But because of the information that your opponent has available to them, they can infer things that change how they make their next move. Firstly, you obviously have some decisions to make that allows you to benefit from the creature attacking. If you have a card that pumps the creature, you're essentially removing their creature on blocks. If your opponent doesn't block, your swinging accelerates the game state by lowering your opponent's life total. By swinging with your creature first, you have limited the amount of actions your opponents can safely make. Even if you're playing more Commander and less one-on-one Magic, there's plenty of things to pay attention to while sequencing. A lot of commanders are engine-based, and making sure you extract perfect amounts of value from each of your cards is key in getting and staying ahead. If I have the ability to play a turn 4 Atraxa with no proliferate targets in play, it might be a smart idea to sandbag playing it in favor of putting something like an Everflowing Chalice or Planeswalker into play first, so that my card extracts the most value possible. Another way to look at sequencing in Commander is in which order you play interaction. A good rule of thumb for any kind of sequencing is starting specific to allow broad options the opportunity to shine. This might seem vague, so let me give an example. If your opponent plays a problematic creature, and you have an Infernal Grasp and an Utter End, and can play either, which do you choose? The choice I would make is Infernal Grasp, because it specifically mentions creatures. Utter End hitting non-land permanents lets us deal with something threatening in the future that isn't necessarily a creature. That way, we present ourselves with the most decisions to make throughout the game by using our cards in the right order. Let's say your opponent casts a Time Warp, and you have a Negate and a Swansong in your hand. This is where it gets complicated. Swansong is technically the more efficient spell for this situation because it targets less things than Negate, but its mana efficiency allows it to be particularly good against opposing counterspells if you see that being a future problem. If you can assess what sort of things you think or know you'll be playing against, you can make an informed decision to decide how to deal with the Time Warp. Magic is an incredibly complex game. The number of game pieces and infinite combinations of board states makes it impossible to decide what is truly the perfect play at any given time, but with experience and careful analysis, you can come to a conclusion that puts you ahead in a way that assures victory. I'm no expert, and I'm constantly looking for ways to improve how I navigate my turns. I hope this video was helpful in explaining some of the thought process behind sequencing. If you have any questions or disagree with any of my thoughts, feel free to comment down below. I'm always excited to have a discussion about this sort of thing. If you enjoyed the video, it would really help me out if you subscribed and hit the like button. Sharing the video with anyone you think would be interested is also really appreciated. Thanks for watching.